Good morning. This week we're starting our study of a Greek civilization. And let's take a look at the map so we can see where this is at. If you'll remember, we have studied the ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. You can see it there on the right side of the map, with the Tigris and Euphrates River that emptied into the Persian Gulf. We studied the Akkadians and the Sumerians and the Babylonians. The Assyrians and even the Persians are just to the east of Mesopotamia. We also studied the Egyptian civilization down there in northeast Africa. You can see it down there with the Nile River. And we looked at some of the minor nations that popped up in between, Syria and Israel, the Phoenicians as well. And there in Asia Minor, we talked about, on the east side of Asia Minor, close to the Mesopotamia, we talked about the Hittite Empire. But thus far, we really have not moved west of this. So this week, we're going to be looking at the Greek civilization that was very prominent during the second millennium BC, and its dominance of the central and east part of the Mediterranean world. So let's take a look at this map. You can see that Greece is basically centered adjacent to the Aegean Sea. The Greeks were a maritime people, and they put colonies all over the place. Matter of fact, you can see the pink section are colonies that the Greeks had all over, from Spain in the west to southern France, the boot of Italy there, which is going to put them in conflict with the Romans at some point. We'll study that later. Sicily, North Africa, Cyprus, even on the Black Sea, you can see there's some colonies, some Greek colonies that they settled. But predominantly there, the southern part of Europe, separated from Asia Minor by the Aegean Sea. That's the place that we call Greece. Now, the word Greece is actually a English or anglicized version of the Roman word Graecia, but the Greeks did not call themselves Greeks. They were actually they referred to themselves as people from Hellas, or from the land of Hellas. So they were Hellenes, or they were Hellenic, and that's the way they refer to themselves. But we use the word Greek. It's a Roman word. But Greek civilization spread throughout the Mediterranean world, and of course had huge impact on many different cultures. Most significantly, the Romans, who adopted and absorbed much of the Greek culture. Again, there's the map with the Greek colonies and the city-states. I want us to look at a timeline of Greece, so we can put this in a time frame of what we're looking at here. So here is our ancient world, basically everything before 500 BC. We're kind of generically calling it the ancient time period. And again, Sumerians, Babylonians, Egyptians, all these guys we kind of looked at. We'll just pull that chart up here, the time frame. Look, so there's the Mesopotamian civilizations, the Hittites, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, and we can actually zoom in a little bit more and bring out a little bit more detail. Here you can see all of the Mesopotamian people groups and civilizations we looked at: Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Amorites, or also called the Babylonians, the Old Assyrian, the New Assyrians. In the Anatolia or Asia Minor area, you can see that on the map. That's the Asia Minor area, and in that we have the Hittite civilization. Central Asia, which is just east of Mesopotamia here, was the Persians, and of course the Canaanites. We got the Syrians or Arameans, Phoenicians, and the Hebrews or Israelite civilizations. And of course, that's right there, central Canaan area. And then in Egypt, which is the corner down here on the map, that's the Egyptian civilization. So that's what we've looked at previously, but right now we're going to look at the next period of time. And this is the Greek civilization, but beginning as early as 3200 BC. It's going to take us all the way down to about 146. You can see the Romans are approximately in that same time frame. So the Greek civilization and time period can be broken down into three basic time periods. You have the Bronze Age Greece, which is the early Greek civilizations. We're going to look at these people groups, the Minoans and Mycenaeans, here in just a minute. Then we've got a period called the Greek Dark Ages. We talked about the collapse of a lot of the Middle Eastern and Mediterranean civilizations around 1200 BC. Well, that's going to usher in the Greek Dark Ages. And then finally, we're going to see a resurgence of the Greek civilization during the Iron Age. And this is going to be some of the time periods that you're most familiar with when you studied Greece. Socrates, Plato, Alexander the Great, all of these classic periods are going to be here. Let's see if we can't break this down a bit further here. All right, so the early Bronze Age time period is going to be the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, and then the Iron Age period here, we're going to break it down into the Archaic period, the Classical period, and then the Hellenistic period, and those are the periods that we're going to be studying. So let's take a look at the Minoan civilization. It's centered on the island of Crete, which is right out in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The Minoans are going to basically dominate the Aegean Sea, the islands here in the southern part of the Aegean Sea. The capital is going to be right here on the North Shore. Palace, incredible palace there at the capital city of Knossos. This is a pretty amazing palace that's going to have hundreds of rooms. There's going to be flushing toilets. There's going to be bathtubs, indoor plumbing. It's a pretty significant palace. The Minoans had a very advanced civilization. King Minos, who you have probably studied in Greek mythology, he's the guy responsible for the creation of the labyrinth with the minotaur in it that consumes little children every year who can't find their way out of the labyrinth. Extensive maritime trade. They're going to trade with people all over the eastern part of the Mediterranean, up here into Anatolia, and even up in the Black Sea into Europe. They'll be trading all over the place. The Minoans were very advanced. They traded olive oil, pottery. They had a love of beauty and art, culture. It is possible that the Philistines came from here. We've talked before about the Philistines are associated with the group of people called the Sea Peoples. And based on culture and study of archaeology, that it is probably from the Minoan area that the Philistine people came and settled in Canaan, on the shores of Canaan. So let's kind of look at this map a little bit closer here. Here is the Mediterranean Sea, and here is the Aegean Sea. We kind of zoomed in here on the Greek islands. And there is Crete with its capital at Knossos. That's with a K, K-N-O-S-S-O-S. And you've got Mycenae, which that's going to be the next civilization, next early Greek civilization we'll talk about in a minute. You've also probably heard of Troy. It's with Troy that the Mycenaeans and other Greeks are going to have the famous Trojan War with a horse that gets left out to trap the Trojans or trick the Trojans. Here's Athens and Sparta. You are probably very familiar with these groups as well. And this whole little peninsula here is called the Peloponnesus. And then, of course, you have to know Olympia because, you know, that's where the Olympics are. And you got to check that out. All right. So let's look here. Oh, here's a zoom in of the island of Crete. And again, here is the capital city of Knossos. Very long, narrow island. Here's a artist rendition of the capital, the palace at the capital. It was a significant monumental architecture. Speaks of a pretty complex and advanced civilization to have this kind of palace with the resources and manpower required to build it. Here is actual archaeological remains and reconstruction. You can see they've clearly painted this based on the color samples that they found here on site. And this is just a small portion of a portico that's been reconstructed. Here's some of the beautiful pottery that they have. The Minoans were famous for their pottery. You can see, of course, all of the sea and aquatic themes and motifs on here, which tells you this is definitely a coastal or sea people. Here's a pottery that is demonstrating the killing of the Minotaur by the Greek Theseus. So that's a pretty famous scene there. And of course, this is a mosaic showing the seafaring nature of the Minoan civilization. But the Minoans weren't alone. Shortly thereafter, probably conquered by this next group, is the Mycenaean civilization. I call them the M&Ms, the M&M people, the Minoans and then the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans are based here at the city-state of Mycenae on the mainland of Greece. And Again, I'm not sure why I put this map in here twice. We can run through that all over again. I apologize for that. Let's see here. Advance, advance, advance. Here we go. There's Mycenae. And so you'll want to know where Mycenae is on your map. All of these locations. This will be on your next test. Some of these locations here, the Peloponnesus and Olympia here. So you'll need to be able to identify the Mediterranean Sea, the Aegean Sea, Crete with its capital at Knossos, Sparta and Athens, Olympia, Mycenae, the Peloponnesus Peninsula here, or Isthmus, right? And of course Troy. So you'll want to know those. All right, so these early civilizations, let's see, Mycenaeans, 1600, 1100, again centered on the mainland of Greece, probably conquered the Minoans around 1400. This group of people was similar to the Minoans, but they were much more warlike, a much stronger military culture, still heavily involved in sea trade, maritime activities, piracy. Warfare dominated their culture. They adapted a lot of the Minoan knowledge of architecture and art, so you'll see them adopt and absorb some of the Minoan characteristics when they conquered them around 1400 BC. And of course, because they are heavily involved in the sea trade, including up by the Black Sea, it's going to put them in conflict with Troy and the Trojans, and this will be a major rival for controlling the trade routes in the Aegean Sea. Troy sits on the Hellespont, which, let me go back here. This is what's called the Hellespont. This is the waterway that connects the Aegean and Mediterranean world with the Black Sea up here. So if you want to trade north here, you've got to come through the Hellespont, and the Trojans sat right here on the coast, and they wanted to dominate this area, but the Mycenaeans wanted access. So this is going to put them in conflict with one another. And one more time, it's going to go through all of these transitions. I apologize. I shouldn't take those out. I'll do that next time. All right, well, this is just good practice for you. You can practice where you know all these. There's Athens and Sparta, Mycenae and Olympia, and the Peloponnesus. There we go. All right, so let's continue on here. Heavy conflict with the Trojans will lead to about a 10-year-long war, which, of course, famously will bring us the Trojan horse, which allows the Greeks and the Mycenaeans to destroy the Trojans, which will actually lead to the next step in Trojan history, as in the mythology of the Greeks and Romans talks about Aeneas and the Aeneid, and he's going to end up leaving Troy and heading across the Mediterranean, end up settling Rome, according to Virgil. So this is an important connection with the Roman world. Somewhere around 1200 BC, another group from the north called the Dorians are going to come and conquer the Mycenaeans. All right, so after the conquering of the Mycenaeans and the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, as we mentioned before, it's going to be a cataclysmic collapse of all the major civilizations in the Eastern Mediterranean world, and includes the Egyptians, the Hittites, and the Greeks. The Greek civilization is going to be greatly impacted as well. And this will usher in the dark ages of Greece history from about 1150 to 750. They're going to have little contact with the outside world. These new people that live here, as I said, the Dorians are the ones who kind of take over Mycenaean territory. They're going to live simpler lives, live in small villages, no monumental architecture like we see at the Palace of Knossos. And it's during this time period that Homer will write and give us the Odyssey and the Iliad. So Homer is responsible for us knowing what we know about Greece during this time period. And it's during this time period that Greek culture mythology is going to begin to take shape and going to lead us into the next period of Greek history. But concerning their religious system, their cultic system, their deities, which I know you know a lot of the pantheon of Greek gods, they are anthropomorphic deities, which means they are basically like men. Their stories help explain the world around them. But these gods and goddesses look not only like humans, but they're going to act like humans and even worse than humans. They're going to demonstrate a great deal of anger, jealousy, rage. pride, lust, and it's not a pretty picture. Zeus, of course, the ruler of the gods at Mount Olympus. Apollo is his son. He's the god of the sun, music, and medicine. Athena, the twin sibling to Apollo, is going to be the patron goddess of Athens, goddess of wisdom. Poseidon, who's Zeus's brother, will be god of the sea and earthquakes. And there's many other deities, but those are some of the ones that you're probably familiar with or heard about. The Olympic Games will be held every 4 years at Olympia to honor the gods at the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. And so that's a little bit about the Greek mythology here. Not a lot of detail, but just to kind of remind you, this is a famous mask of Agamemnon. Agamemnon was a king, a Mycenaean king, connected to the Trojan War. This was what might have been a funerary mask found by archaeologists, but the truth is we know it's not. Originally, they believed it was from him, but it's not. But it's representative of Mycenaean culture and art. You can see the detail in the mustaches, the eyebrow, the nose, the mouth, the lips. I mean, there's a great deal of detail in this, and so it speaks to the Mycenaean understanding of art and beauty. So let's move on here. We've gone through the early Greek period and the Dark Ages, and this brings us to the next phase, which is going to lead us into the Iron Age, which is going to be the classical period. But before we get there, we've got to know some things about the Greeks and the way they structured their governments, their city-states, their identity. First thing to know is that the Greeks, first and foremost, were identified with their city-state before they were with a Greek identity. If you were Spartan, you were Spartan. If you were Athenian, you were Athenian. And then secondarily, you were Greek. It's kind of like for us Texans. We sort of identify as Texans and then secondarily as Americans. It's just such a strong pathos that we have for our state that we identify primarily as Texans. We take a great deal of pride in Texas culture and identity. And it's the same way with the Greeks. A great deal of differentiation between the different city-states, so much so that the identity held first with their city-state and then their Greek identity secondarily. They did know that they were a part of something bigger than just their city-state, but their city-state was primary. So you can see that we're going to look at a couple of these here in just a minute. But the centerpiece of the city-state was the city. The Greek word is polis. And one of the things that helps us understand why they had such a narrowly defined identity based on their city-state is to understand the geography of the Greek mainlands and the islands. First off, the islands are surrounded by water, so you're cut off from other places. So you are a bit isolated, and so you identify with yourself. The mainland is so mountainous that all of these city-states, again, were separated, divided from the rest of the city-states because of the mountainous terrain that made it difficult to travel. And so they all sort of developed their own cultures and identities in their isolated states. So that's important to know, is that its geography played a role in keeping them sort of separated as opposed to uniting them. But their cities, or their polis, were built at the base of hills quite often, with a fortress at the top of the hill called the Acropolis. The polis was the ultimate source of Greek identity, culture, protection, etc. And you can see a picture here of a polis. So here, often on a shore or bay, they would found their city, and down here is the polis, and you can see at the top is the Acropolis up here, and you're going to see the Agora, which is the center place of the city, which is like a market. We'll look at another picture here that shows us. Here's an Agora. You can see the Acropolis at the top of the hill here, and at the Agora, you've got everything's going on. It's an open space in the Greek city that was used for public gatherings, which included politics, like speeches by political figures or philosophers, religion with temples, different teachers teaching their philosophical ideas, commerce and trade. You can see all these different traders carrying on business. And of course, social gatherings happened here as well. So the Agora thought I had typed the word in here. I don't see the word agora, but there's the word right there, agora. This is the center place of the polis. Now, as far as the forms of government for the Greeks, there were basically 4 different developments or levels of Greek government. The first one is monarchy, which is age old. It's basically a king ruling, one person, monarchy, ruling everybody. And he, of course, might have a council of advisors that will give him leadership guidance. But basically, he's large and in charge. He's ruling. Eventually, an assembly of nobles assumed the power of the king and became an oligarchy. So when a group of nobles decided, hey, we can do better with a group of us instead of one, they sort of took over. And oligarchy means rule by a few, oli meaning few. So this is like the upper class. That's who the nobles are. They end up ruling, and of course, they're the people with all the power, and they're going to end up conflicting with the people who were lower class. And quite often, this would bring a great deal of dissatisfaction, leading to some revolt, maybe civil war, and eventually, a lot of the times, a tyrant would come to power. And so then you've got tyranny, which is rule by a tyrant, which is not necessarily the same thing as a king, although a king can be a tyrant. But this person, a lot of the times, maybe championed the cause of the poor, but he achieved it by violent means and sort of setting aside the rights and privileges of everybody to get what he's trying to accomplish. Eventually, well, here's a picture of him here, monarchy, right? Then that often led to an oligarchy, which often led to a tyrant. And eventually, when you move through these processes, sometimes you end up with something special, a democracy, where it's ruled by the people. And democracy happens when people decide that a rule by an individual or rule by a small group of rich, wealthy people or even a tyrant is just not acceptable, and they decide to take matters into their own hands and rule themselves. So this is self-governance, and the Greek city-states are the place that we see the birth of democracy. It's one of the unique contributions that they bring to us. And what you end up having is adult males could vote and help rule the city. Now, if you were a female or you were not a citizen of the city-state or a slave, you could not vote. So it's not universal democracy, but it is a step in that direction. And eventually we'll see other people enfranchised to be able to engage in the democratic process. So 2 of the main city-states that you probably have familiar with is Sparta and Athens. We're going to look real quickly at these 2. Sparta is going to be a very militaristic city-state, highly values the military training to young men and women, began at a very young age. We would definitely see it in our modern culture as barbaric and cruel, but it was the way that their culture worked. Being an excellent warrior was the highest virtue, and they had an oligarchic form of civil government. They used the military to establish their oligarchic city-states in the Peloponnesian region of Greece. That's that little isthmus, that little peninsula. And so they eventually will form the Peloponnesian League, which will be created to oppose the Athenian way of life, which was deemed inferior to their own. They didn't much care for the Athenians, fought a lot with them. And here is, of course, a stereotypical picture of a Spartan warrior, quite fierce looking. The Athenians, however, was quite the opposite of Sparta in many ways. They valued and nurtured creativity, commerce, democracy, individualism, complete opposite of the Spartans. They maintained the creative and intellectual heritage of the Minoans and Mycenaean culture. So they were very much appreciative of the art, culture, beauty, that kind of thing. It's during the Homeric age, during the time of Homer, that Athens was ruled by a king, and then it migrated to an oligarchy. And then a guy by the name of Solon, he's an Athenian statesman. He's going to take office, the office of archon, which is a noble, which is elected to be the chief magistrate of a council. And in 594, he's going to institute a very short-lived group of reforms that's going to help the common person. He is going to try to reform the way they do business that helps everybody, not just the wealthy few. Later on, a guy by the name of Pericles will basically establish democracy in Athens. And this is a huge step forward for mankind. And here is a wonderful picture of an Athenian warrior as well. Hey, just because they believed in culture and learning and philosophy and stuff, don't sell them short. They were very powerful and very fierce warriors as well, as we will see here in the next few minutes. Eventually, they're going to come up against the Persians. The Persians, remember we talked about them. They took over the Babylonian Empire, so they're stretching from India and Persia all the way into Canaan and Egypt, and then they take over the Asia Minor area. And remember, we've got Greek colonies on the coast of Asia Minor, and this is going to put the Persians in conflict with the Greeks, and this is going to set us up for quite a bit of war between the two. So the Persians are expanding westward into Asia Minor. They're going to subdue the Lydians, which is in Asia Minor, and as well as the Greek colonies on the coast of Asia Minor. The Greeks eventually will revolt. Those that are on the coast there will revolt. And this will lead to Darius, who is the Persian king, wanting to punish the Greeks for revolting. And he's going to cross the Aegean Sea with his army and his fleet and invade Greece at Marathon. And the Greeks will surprise the Persians. And though they're completely outnumbered, they're going to beat the Persians. So this is a pretty significant battle, the Battle of Marathon. The Athenians had told the women and old folks that if we lose this battle, don't give in to the Persians, like don't give yourselves over to them, have like mass suicide. And so they sent a runner, the Greeks, after they won, they sent a runner back to Athens to tell them of the victory so that they didn't take their lives. And the guy ran the 26 miles from the beach of Marathon to Athens, gave the good news, and collapsed and died. But that's where we get marathons from. It's the 26.2, I think, miles that you run today is because of that distance there. So you got a scorecard here, Greeks versus Persians. We got 1-0 Persians. That's for the initial revolt. But the Battle of Marathon, there's the outline of the Battle of Marathon right there. They came ashore on the beach, and they just totally surprised the Persians by their tactics. So now it's 1-1. The revolt first, the Persians won, but the Greeks won the Battle of Marathon. Well, what happens next? This is the famous Battle of Thermopylae, the Battle of Hot Gates, which if you've ever watched the movie 300, this is that movie. Xerxes, the son of Darius, is going to cross that Hellespont we talked about earlier, make his way down the coast, and he's going to encounter 7,000 Greeks. He's got 200,000 Persian soldiers and auxiliary soldiers, and they're going to meet at Thermopylae, which was a very narrow pass. The Greeks decided to mitigate the Persian numerical advantage by engaging at a very narrow place where the Persians could not send all their men at one time, so it sort of evened the battlefield. But the Greeks were betrayed by another Greek who told the Persians how to go around them, and they snuck up behind them. End up destroying them all. King Leonidas of the Spartans and the Athenians who were with him, they all died. Persians will go on to burn Athens. Here is the battle here. So this is all mountains here. There's the sea, so it's a very narrow place that you can fight. So it doesn't matter how many men you have. You can only have so many on the front lines, and this is where the Greeks fought them. But they were told how to get through this goat pass all the way around, and they circled around and swallowed them up, and eventually they would go on to get to Athens. So you can count that up here. We got 2-1. Persians are winning here. Valiant effort, Greeks, but they lost. That's going to bring us to another very important battle, the Battle of Salamis Bay. The Greeks are basically going to trick the Persian fleet into attacking them at Salamis Bay, and their quick, smaller ships were able to outmaneuver the Persians and ram them. The Persians were completely caught off guard and their fleet destroyed. This will lead to the beginning of the end for the Persians in their invasion of the Greek mainlands. They're going to be defeated the next year at the Isthmus of the Peloponnesus, and Greece would halt Persian advancement into the west. Here is the Battle of Salamis Bay, and it's a great little battle. They completely destroyed them. So here's our scorecard: Salamis Bay. Now it's 2-2, and then you got the Battle of the Plataea, the Peloponnesus. Greeks got it, so it's a total of 3-2. Greeks win. Persians go home with their tail between the legs. There we go. Persians lose, Greeks win. All right. So what happens next? Well, look, hey, having defeated the Persians, what do you do next? You fight each other. And so all the individual city-states are going to vie for power and control of the Greek mainland. Athens, Sparta, the Thessalonians, Macedonians, among others. There's a bunch of city-states. They're all going to fight wars basically for the next 30 years or so. The Athenians are going to lead a group of people called the Delian League against the Spartan-led Peloponnesian League. And the once dominant Athenians would eventually get defeated, leaving control over the Greek mainland open. And it is eventually here that the Macedonians from the north will defeat the other city-states and unify the Greeks under one banner. So here's a broad picture of the city-states here. Let's see if we can't zoom in on this. And here is the different city-states. Here's Sparta. Remember, they're in the Peloponnesus here. Eventually, they're going to unify themselves with all these folks. The Athenians will unify themselves with something called the Delian League. But they're just all going to fight with each other. And eventually, it's the Macedonians that are going to come in here and clean up and unite them. A guy by the name of Philip II of Macedon is going to conquer and unify the cities. He lost one of his eyes in battle. That's why he's got this sort of wicked look to him here. But this is the guy who's the dad of Alexander the Great. So he's going to conquer, unify the city-states. Unfortunately, he gets assassinated, and his son Alexander comes to the throne at the age of only 20 years old. He's been tutored by Aristotle, who's going to teach him a love for the Greek culture. And Alexander is going to set his sights on the Persian Empire, wanting to fulfill his father's desire to get revenge on the Persians for their treatment of the Greek city-states in the decades before. And you probably have heard this, Alexander wins. He's going to defeat the Persians decisively, and he's going to conquer all of the Persian Empire from Asia Minor all the way down south to Egypt, and then all the way through Persia. He's going to continue east and go into India. Within 9 years, he has conquered the entire Persian Empire. But after nearly a decade of constant warfare, his men says, we've had enough. It's been 10 years since we've been home, since we've seen our wives and our families, and they're going to refuse to go any further east. Alexander is going to do much to spread the Greek culture throughout his empire. He's going to end up marrying it to the local cultures and customs, Egyptian customs. So you're going to see this merging and conflating of Egyptian Greek culture down in Egypt, and in the Persian and even Indian cultures merging with Greek culture in their respective territories. Alexander's known for the massive library that gets built in Alexandria, Egypt, named after him. So that's a pretty important piece of cultural detail. But unfortunately, Alexander dies at the age of 32. We're not sure. Is he poisoned by rivals? Is he poisoned by some of his close confidants and generals who think he has sort of forgotten his Greek heritage? Don't know. But as a result, his generals will fight for control of the empire basically for the next 40 years. And when the dust settles and the smoke clears, 4 generals will have divided the territory into 4 kingdoms. The Seleucids, which will take control of Syria and Mesopotamia, Persian territory. The Ptolemies, I don't really say the P, it's not Ptolemy, but it's Ptolemy. They're going to take over Egypt. The Antigonids will take over Greece and Macedon. And then the Attalids will take over Asia Minor. So this is the division of Alexander's kingdom. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies will come into heavy prominence with our study of the Bible and the New Testament. This will greatly impact the Jewish world. Of course, interestingly enough, the book of Daniel prophesies about 200 years earlier regarding Alexander's reign, as well as the 4 kingdoms that arise afterwards. Very awesome when we see God's word sharing with us history before it becomes history. So the Greek culture is very important here. Alexander spreads it. He loves it. The language, the culture. He's going to spread it across the Middle East. It's a love for Greek culture. It's called Hellenism, and this will greatly impact that world. Culture is basically a reflection of what a civilization values. And the Greeks valued beauty, freedom, justice, truth, knowledge, a creative spirit, self-control, restraint, balance, moderation. These are all very unique Greek kinds of concepts. Not that other civilizations didn't have some understanding of beauty or truth or justice, but the Greeks, these things were highly valued and prized. The term Hellene or Hellenic, as I mentioned earlier, is the term that the Greeks used for themselves from the land of Hellas. Athens will be considered the cradle of Western civilization or Western culture. And as the Greek or Hellenic culture is spread by Alexander and his successors, as I said, it's going to mix with these Eastern cultures, and they will become Hellenistic. So they're not Hellenic, they are not Greek, but they are like Greek. And so that's the term Hellenistic. And the period between the Persians and the Romans is called the Hellenistic Age. This will be a time of an infusion of Eastern and Western thoughts, ideas, and philosophies. So Greek culture is very human-focused. Philosophy and science is going to praise the human mind and reason. Literature will focus on human lives and acts. Physical activity, focused on developing physical perfection, and even their art is going to focus on human form. We'll look at some examples of this in just a minute. The Greeks stressed dignity and uniqueness of man, but apart from God. So this is a distinctly non-Christian concept. Obviously, Christians and Jews understood mankind created in the image of God, and that we can't get away from our dignity and uniqueness apart from our being the creative work of God. But the Greeks did not see that. They stressed the uniqueness of mankind apart from God. And so just a couple of quick philosophers. Philosophers just means lover of wisdom. They're asking important questions like, why do I exist and who am I? Thales of Miletus will be the father of philosophy. And of course, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, significant philosophers, each student of the one before them. Plato is a student of Socrates, and Aristotle is a student of Plato. The Epicureans is another philosophic group. They believe that happiness comes through the avoidance of pain and thus seeking pleasure. So if you can just seek pleasure and avoid pain, then you're going to be happy. So it's the Epicureans. Interesting philosophical view. We're going to talk about that in class. And then there's the Stoics that believe man's life was determined by fate. Accept it and then live a life of duty. And so Zeno is the guy who founds the Stoics. And we'll talk some more about him this week as well. A couple other famous guys who developed some very important scientific and mathematical concepts. Pythagoras said the universe can be understood through mathematics. Of course, we get the Pythagorean theorem. Hippocrates, the father of medicine. Euclid was the father of geometry. The Greeks determined Earth was round and determined the circumference of the Earth. And a Greek formulated the latitude and longitude lines of our globe. So these are important contributions in the Greek by the Greeks in the scientific world. And then literature, of course, you got history. The Greek historian Herodotus, he's considered the father of history. He actually wrote a significant work on the Persian Wars. And of course, they contribute in the area of drama, the epic poem by Homer, the Iliad, and then, of course, the Odyssey. They had comedies and tragedies, but these were written more than just for entertainment purposes. These were to help educate, teach their values, the morals, the religious beliefs, civic pride, etc. So there was more than just being entertained and getting a laugh. And then here's a couple of quick pictures, things that help you understand some of the beauty and art of the Greeks. They had urns and sculptures and temples. Three important columns. There's the Doric type of column that they gave us, the Ionic, which has these little scrolls here on the end, and the very ornate Corinthian capital here with all these sort of, you got the scrolls, but you've kind of got these flowered leaf kind of art, sculpting here. I don't know what the right term is, but that's the Corinthian, very sophisticated look. This one, of course, is Doric, very plain and simple. The Ionic, sort of in between those two. Of course, their pottery, Greek fineware is famous. They got the blackware and the what we call the redware. A lot of their stories, their mythologies told on their artwork. This is some Greeks harvesting olives. This is an olive tree. You can see them getting the olives as they're falling down. And we talked about the form, the body form. You can see how incredible the form of the bodies are, the definition of the muscles, the facial expressions, very important in the Greek understanding of art. And here is one of their monumental structures here. We'll talk some more about these this week. Incredible detail in the face, the hair, very important, the human form in the Greek art. And this is a very famous one here as well. And of course, there's another piece of monumental architecture, the Parthenon on the Acropolis at Athens. Building has been destroyed so many times, the roof is completely missing. And the front of the building is actually the capitals and a lot of the decoration of the mythology you can find in the British Museum. And of course, a large statue of Diana was there. I can't remember if it's like, you can see the scale here. That guy's probably 5.5, 6 feet tall. This is like a 40-foot statue. It was massive. And there's the Parthenon, a reconstruction of the Parthenon, all lit up. So that's our study of the Greeks. We'll be studying that for the next week and a half, and I hope you enjoy this time period.